Hello and welcome to the Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike DeLuke, and it's my mission to help you lead a happier, healthier, and more prosperous life, both personally and professionally. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Doc Podcast. Today, my guest is Beth Lambert. Beth attended Oxford University, graduated from Williams College, and holds a master's degree in American Studies from Fairfield University. She is a best-selling author, educator, and former healthcare consultant who has monitored and documented the escalating rates of chronic childhood conditions for over 15 years. Beth is founder and executive director of Documenting Hope, a nonprofit organization that focuses on root cause healing solutions for children's chronic health and developmental issues. She is also the creator and executive producer of the Documenting Hope Project, a multi-year prospective research study and media project that examines the cumulative impact of environmental stressors on health and their mitigation through personalized and systems-based treatment approaches. Beth is also the mother of 3 children and is passionate about raising awareness about the connection between daily choices, human health, and planetary health. We are going to have a fascinating discussion about the chronic disease epidemic facing our children today, including what research has revealed to be the potential causes, as well as her thoughts on how we can reverse course to help our kids live happier and healthier lives. The current mentality of polypharma and fix everything with a pill is not sustainable, and it is certainly not getting to the root cause of the issue. As many of you know, I am big on trying to get to the etiology of the problem and not just treat the symptom. So I'm fascinated by the work that Beth and her team are doing. This is such important information, and it not only impacts the health and well-being of our children, it also has a huge impact on the cost and availability of healthcare services, both now and into the future. Whether you're a parent, grandparent, healthcare provider, or just curious as to why our children are so unhealthy, you do not want to miss this episode. Please share this content with your friends and colleagues as well, as we need to get this message out. The lives and health of our children depend upon it. So without further ado, let's get on to my interview with the amazing Beth Lambert. Enjoy the show, everybody. Welcome to the Doc Podcast, Beth.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Really excited to have this conversation with you. We met up at Panny when I spoke a couple months ago there, as did you. We were both speakers that day, and I was really fascinated by not only the topic you discussed, but the data that you have to back a lot of this up and how evidence-based and rooted in science a lot of this is. And we're going to talk about that challenge because the topic we're going to be discussing and chronic disease, especially as it relates to our children, it's hard to quantify and it's hard to really figure out what's going on. And you talk about tabulating and presenting data, it's a challenge. And I so admire that you're taking that on because it is no small or easy task. So before we jump into getting much more granular on this topic, how did you get to be to the point you're at today? And in that, would you mind sharing why you're so passionate about this topic and on the journey you're on?
Yeah, so I got into this world the way many people do is through my experience as a parent when I had children. I actually started my young career in pharmaceuticals and healthcare consulting, so I kind of had a perspective on what the American healthcare industry was like from that side. But when I became a parent, my oldest child had some symptoms, and it was the kind of thing that was like not quite getting a diagnosis, but it was gut symptoms, GI discomfort, sensory, behavioral, skin issues. Like it was really just a bunch of different symptoms. And I knocked on a lot of conventional medical doors being like, what might be causing these symptoms? And in my experience, I couldn't get a single doctor or expert to look at the root causes. They were more like, here, put a cream on it, or here, let me see what pharmaceuticals I have to give you. And I was like, wait a minute, I've worked for this industry. I get it. It's a business, but like, can we talk about root causes? So that led me to the Office of an Integrative Physician, who used more kind of root causes approaches and holistic approaches. And I ended up working with a bunch of different holistic type practitioners, and we got to the root causes. I was like, wait a minute, this is insane that we have an entire medical system that is set up to suppress symptoms when we could actually be getting at the root cause of the symptoms and curing or fully reversing health conditions rather than just managing them. And so that really lit a fire in me to say, all right, everybody should know about this. Why does everybody not know about this? And also at the same time, I was, as many young parents are, meeting other young parents who had kids who were getting diagnosed with autism and ADHD and autoimmune diseases for kids. I thought autoimmune diseases were things that happened to older adults who probably had very stressful lives, or, that wasn't for kids. So all my radar started going off, and I was like, something is wrong with the kids today. And my mother, who was a grandmother, was like chirping in my ear, the kids didn't used to be like this. Kids didn't used to have all this eczema. Kids didn't used to have all this gastro reflux. Like, what's going on? Mm-hmm. So I actually was in graduate school when I was a young mom. And in finding all these solutions for my kids, I was also really wanting to understand how they got to that place how did they get there originally? Where did this come from? How did we have so many symptoms when I saw myself as an athlete and a healthy eater, and where's this coming from? So I actually used my graduate degree to investigate the environmental factors that were contributing to not just my kids' issues, but all of my peers' kids' issues. And I ended up publishing a book called The Compromised Generation that looks at the root causes of what I call the new childhood epidemics, the epidemics of autism, ADHD, autoimmune diseases, allergies, asthma, all these things that are just escalating in our kids. So that's really where I got my start. And then also at the time when I published my book, I was like, nobody reads books anymore. Why am I even writing a book? No one's going to read it. I started a nonprofit organization because I felt like I have found some answers. I have actually met people who have fully reversed their kids' conditions. I've met the doctors who are doing the good work. How do I get this out there? And that's when I started Documenting Hope, which is our nonprofit organization that's dedicated to helping families find these solutions and advancing the research to show that these solutions are valid, that they can be implemented, and they can be scaled.
That's so awesome. And so often when I speak with people, even colleagues, parents, it started with their own child. And so many, even in my world where there are a lot of orthodontists and dentists who may not believe in sort of the concept of earlier intervention, going in young, helping proactive, until they see their 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old suffering to breathe and having some of these chronic health issues. And so it is such a common story, and I give you tremendous credit for continuing to persist, because I have to imagine, and if you wouldn't mind add a little bit to it, just because I feel that many parents go on this journey, what were some of the obstacles you faced when you were going the traditional medicine route? Give it a cream, give it a pill, kind of polypharma, let's see what we can do to treat this. How was it received by the medical community when you were pushing back? And then how did you find alternative providers that would give you different answers?
I actually was kicked out of 3 pediatricians' offices. I was told
literally they were like, you can't come here.
Yes. I was told to leave their practices. And I ended up finding a pediatrician who was a DO. And I love DOs because their training is a little bit, they're more holistically oriented. Generally speaking, they use manual therapy. They see the body in a more systems kind of lens. And that's why, I found a new home in the office of a DO. But I think that I got resistance, not just from my pediatricians, but from my friends. I had, a couple of friends who are conventionally trained medical doctors who weren't sort of seeing things eye to eye with me. I have had, I grew up in a family with my dad was a dentist, my brother-in-law is a dentist, or actually an orthodontist, and sort of a very medical family. They were embracing, very quickly. They saw the results firsthand and they're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I'm on board. But for people who weren't as close to me, I definitely felt some resistance that we were doing something that was woo-woo or, really alternative and not backed by data, when that actually isn't true. If you dig into the medical literature, many of the things that are used by holistic and integrative physicians are backed by evidence, but it's just that I don't know if it's intellectual laziness or training that people have received, but there's not a wide embracing of these kinds of approaches.
It's so true. I just did an episode with Mark Cruz, who's a dentist in California, and we were talking about this exact concept as it relates to early intervention and airway and a sort of alternative mindset, taking a more proactive. I often speak of Outlive from Peter Attia, that medicine 3.0, he calls it a more proactive, systems-based, less siloed approach. And when we were discussing this, one of the things he said was, just because you're not aware of the evidence doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I find that all the time because we are so specialized in our training, because we are taught this is the way, this is what we almost feel like the schooling we go through, they tell us everything that we need to know. And there really can't be anything outside of that because they would have told us, right? I mean, it's, I don't know whether it's protective in nature or it's just sort of our own minds not wanting to believe that there could be all these things we didn't learn. And then we start practicing in a certain way. And the challenge to undo a lot of the input we've received, as well as then on top of that, change our behavior is really daunting to a lot of people, and they're threatened by it. So I find a lot of people just put up barriers and put up walls. I give tremendous credit to your dad, and is it your brother or your brother-in-law?
Yeah.
Your brother-in-law for being open to changing and thinking differently about this, because that is not the norm. Interestingly, as you said about the data and literature too, as I started getting questioned on what I was doing treating kids younger, and people are saying there are no data, there's no, this is not in the literature. I started diving into it. It's all over the place. And again, just because you didn't read the articles doesn't mean they don't exist. And I'll constantly, in online study groups, someone will say, well, the tongue has no impact on airway or breathing. And I'll post 10, 12 references, and then they just start making personal attacks. It's almost like they can't handle the fact that this evidence exists. So it's easier to just kind of fingers in the ears, la, la, la. I don't want to know. Do you find that as well?
Yeah. I also think if you're the average clinician, whether you're a dentist or a pediatrician or whatever your practices that you're trying to run, you're a clinician, you're a business person. You don't have time to keep up on the literature. Are you kidding? You're barely keeping your staff, engaged with what needs to go on. I get it. It's no criticism of the individual people for not having the time to dig into the literature. I'm going to be a critic of the system. And the system is sort of corporate medicine is taken over. And so the interests of corporate medicine are prevailing. And so the interests of the patient and the individual humans is being put in the back seat. So I think we have to look at this, from a bigger lens and not sort of, go after the clinicians. It's not their fault. They're just trying to keep their bills paid and the head above water. That's hard. By the way, when you go to dental school or medical school, they don't teach you how to run a business. So you got to figure that out. So I think that we could do more to keep people informed and engaged of the emerging science. And that, that's a challenge that we still need to meet.
Yeah, it's actually a great point. I'm really glad you made it, because this system is broken at so many levels. And the educational system, I have been continually disappointed in the education system. If you think about it, I mean, most orthodontists graduate from an orthodontic residency treating one or two, some none, patients under the age of 9. Period. Don't see them, don't treat them, don't know how to not only treat them, but to manage them behaviorally. Yeah. We don't have that skill set. And analogous to that is in the medical arena. They're not learning about the microbiome at most places, right? They're not learning about sleep and airway. There's such a lack of understanding of the etiological nature of a lot of the disease that we work so hard to figure out how to treat. Right. And so, yes, that system is very, very broken. What do you attribute that to? Is it just because it was developed decades ago and it's just such a Herculean task to try to steer that ship in a different direction? Do you feel like the people running these organizations have ulterior motives? And what are your thoughts on, as you've dug into this, why these big bureaucratic systems of healthcare, of education, of pharma are not letting this be the way that we think, or allowing us to push this in a different direction?
Well, I think that, we're talking about a medical system that's well over 120 years old in terms of, the conventional medical approach. And then after World War II, there was this shift that happened where all of a sudden we were putting a lot of faith and hope into miracle molecules. If you think about what happened with penicillin after World War II, you had people dying of tuberculosis. You couldn't fight infections. Think about wars and how people died from a wound. Then you had penicillin, and oh my gosh, you are saving people's lives by this pill, this little pill. That's all it took. I mean, I really do think culturally that had such a huge impact on how we think about health and wellness that we haven't really shaken that off. And so if you think about how the pharmaceutical industry has emerged since World War II, it's a petrochemical company that allows us to create pharmaceuticals. You can't have a patent to medicine or a pharmaceutical unless you tweak its molecules, unless you chemically alter it so that you can patent it. So it's something different from nature, because in theory, you can't patent something from nature. So the entire industry is based on us taking something in nature that our body would recognize and know what to do, and modifying it so that our body doesn't recognize that or might respond to it as a toxin, or it will create side effects. That's why we have side effects with pharmaceuticals. So if you think about how that industry has evolved, going from like people's expectation that if I take a pill, that will solve my problem, and every ill has a pill, it really not just is the system, it's our cultural way of understanding and thinking about how to solve health issues. So we've really lost touch with, the way that people would have looked at it. I mean, even, 100, 150 years ago, homeopathy was actually still used. Homeopathy is more of a systems-based approach. It's more based in natural medicine. Naturopathic medicine was more widely used. So the pharmaceutical industry really took over post-World War II and has subsequently, because of blockbuster drugs, penicillin would be one, but there's been thousands subsequently, and so much money going into that system, they've been able to get into the medical schools and train physicians to suppress symptoms, to name it, blame it, tame it. Like that's the cultural healthcare system we have. And so I think that has just sort of been what I would call an emergent phenomenon. It's not like I don't see like some smoking man behind a curtain being like, how can we make people sick and make the most money off of them? Sure, those people exist, but like I don't see it as a grand conspiracy. I see it as an emergent phenomenon. It happened because of this experience we had with these miracle drugs, and we're continuing to push that because there's money to be made when you have a miracle drug. Now, it's breaking down because people are taking the miracle drugs and experiencing side effects and not getting better. And so people are looking for other ways to go. And I do feel like we're in a cultural revolution here with regard to how people view health, and things are changing. The problem is, and the thing that's lagging on this cultural revolution, that's not tipping it over, is the payer system. And we don't have a payer system that supports natural medicine, holistic, integrative, systems-based approaches. The minute we get the payers on board, the whole thing will crumble, I think. So I do think there is a very big need for us to collect more evidence about the efficacy of these more systems-based approaches, sort of longitudinally over long term, to show that there's better health outcomes when you're not suppressing symptoms and you're paying less over time, and you're preventing chronic illnesses and reversing chronic illnesses so that the hospitals don't have to keep paying things. Medicare or Medicaid doesn't have to keep paying for things. So I have another book coming on this. I have a lot to say about this issue because I do think this is cultural. And I think it got really bad in the 1990s when the United States became one of 2 countries in the world to allow direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. And as soon as they did that, like you look at these drugs that would have had a very small market share, they just took off because people were watching this on TV saying like, oh, I didn't realize I had GERD. Oh, they call it GERD, reflux. And then they asked for the med at the physician's office. So like that is a major problem. And I do hope they repeal the direct-to-consumer advertising of pharmaceuticals because I think that is creating a big, big problem. And we're one of 2 countries that does it. Like that's insane.
I didn't know we were one of 2 countries. I remember that in the 90s, that changing and starting to see ads for drugs. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is really weird. Like they're advertising for medications. Shouldn't this be handled? Shouldn't your doctor be recommending this? And now it's almost background noise. It's so common. Yeah. It's so pervasive. You can't watch anything without drug commercials. It's so ironic because sometimes you'll be watching something and there's the food commercial, which we'll talk about that too, which is promoting food that is highly processed and has little of any nutritional value, and then followed right up by something that is, say, going to increase your level of stress or anxiety, meaning it's something that with a device or a product that's going to prevent you from sleeping as much or resting as much because it keeps you hyperactive. And then you get into the pharmaceuticals to solve the problem of the previous 2. And you literally, if you watch some of these commercials, you just start to, it's almost depressing. You're like, oh my gosh, it's literally like this pull on us. And we're going to dive into that throughout today's episode on some of these factors that are contributing to this overall issue and the rise in chronic disease in all of us. That being said, chronic disease in children, we don't really think of children and chronic, right? Disease. I mean, especially chronic disease, you tend to think of children as something might be acute, right? They get a cold or the flu, or they might have some sort of acute illness. Yes, some are sadly stricken with lymphomas and leukemias and cancer. The norm seems to be now, though, chronic disease is pervasive in children. One of the statistics you had quoted was that 1 in 12 children have an anaphylactic food allergy, 10% of kids have ADHD, 1 in 8 have asthma, and 1 in 30 have autism, generally speaking. When you stop and think about those numbers, that is scary. That is really, really scary. So if you could talk a little bit to the audience about what is causing this? Why over just a couple of generations are we seeing this seismic shift in the health of our children?
Well, I think we do know what's causing this, but I think the best way to understand what's happening is to go back to the 1960s. And we had good epidemiological data from the 1960s that shows we had maybe 2% of children in the United States with a chronic health condition. Now, the statistic that's commonly cited is 54% of American children have a chronic health or developmental issue. And that was coming from a study that was done in 2011. So no one's actually done the research or published papers on like what the actual disease burden looks like in American children right now. I would venture to guess it's like 75% have at least one or more. But I'm working on trying to get that kind of data out there. Basically, you have this meteoric rise from the 60s to now that cannot be explained away by, we're just like better diagnosing or, like we're talking about things that you don't miss, like anaphylactic allergies. You don't miss that because the kid dies,
Right.
And debilitating autoimmune diseases and severe autism. There's so much debate as to whether autism is growing or not. And if you look at more milder cases, sure, you could say, okay, well, we are diagnosing that kid today because we understand autism better now than we did in 1960. But you don't miss severe cases. You don't miss the cases where the kids are non-speaking. You don't miss the cases where they can't toilet on their own, when they're self-injurious, when they're head banging, when they're smearing fecal matter. Like those are severe cases, which can be 25 to 40%, depending on what study you look at. You're talking about a significant portion of kids that will not be able to live independently. 85% of kids with autism, when they grow up, cannot live independently, cannot have jobs. So this is not we're overdiagnosing. Well, in some cases, maybe there's some overdiagnosis, but that doesn't explain the epidemic. So my point is just to say we have so many sick kids. There's plenty of data out there. We need more studies to say, like in an updated fashion, where are we today, as opposed to the 54%, which again, I think is low. But if you look at the comparison between today and 1960, you have to ask the question, since epidemics can't be genetic in origin, they have to be something environmental. Clearly, we're living differently or doing something differently than we were in the 1960s. So that opens up like a lot of questions. Is it the food? Is it the air? Is it the water? Is it birthing practices? Is it all those pharmaceutical medications that are now have been used in a multi-generational way? Is it how we are educating our children? Like, where is this coming from? And you can look at any one of those categories and you can find evidence that supports increases in chemicals, for instance, way more chemical exposures to things like glyphosate, atrazine, heavy metals, PFOAs. Like there's so many chemicals, more chemicals in the environment than there was in the 1960s. The food that we're eating is so different. Kids used to eat organic by the nature of eating, like all food was organic. And now it's all sprayed with chemicals and it's processed, ultra processed foods. I mean, I could go into any one of these categories to tell you that things have changed since, that sort of post-World War II industrial era and even further back, like into the 19th century. So the answer is, what is causing all of this chronic illness in our kids? It's not one thing. It's a total load of modern living health stressors. And there are thousands of health stressors that are part of our children's everyday lives that weren't there 50 years ago or 75 years ago, and certainly not 150 years ago. And there's so much evidence to support that. What our organization is doing now is trying to fund and execute research studies that test this total load theory, this idea that, it isn't one thing for, every child, it's many things. And each child's particular basket or bucket of exposures is going to be different from the next child, which is why it's so hard for people to understand what's causing this chronic illness epidemic, because there's thousands of individual variables, and each child's set of individual variables is going to differ depending on their health history, their exposures, their family, all that kind of stuff. But it's still modern American living, and modern American living is toxic. It's stressful. It is overwhelming for these kids. They're not given the traditional developmental windows to do the things that they're supposed to do, because we stick them in these baby swings and car seats and we rush. I mean, it's so many things. And we have to start thinking not linearly, like, right, we come from this science where you do double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized trial to test the effect of one thing on one health outcome. That's like 19th century science. The science of the 21st century, now that we have AI, is like, whoa, what do all these variables do together in combination? And we can figure this out now. We just have to get the willpower and the funding to do that kind of research, to click it in people's brains that, like, life is complex. Life is multifactorial. So of course our kids in the modern world are sick, because there's many, many variables that are negative health influencers.
So well said. And we're going to come back to a little bit later on how we manage some of those variables, because you're doing some amazing work in that regard as well. But sticking with those variables, I find that that's one of the hard parts about this, and I'm preaching to the choir with you, but to let the audience think a little more deeply on this, is I think it's hard to wrap our minds around this, because there's not this direct cause and effect nature to this phenomenon, right? It's not like you take this pill, you develop autism. You do this, you develop a life-threatening sensitivity or eczema. It's kind of this, it's like this largely stochastic process there's this interplay of genetic predispositions, environmental exposures, lifestyle choices, and there's some randomness of all of those. And epidemiological research is challenging in nature just because of the randomness. And so it's so hard to conduct this research because you logistically, to isolate out variables, which is, like you said, that randomized control model. And that was my talk at Panny, was talking about the sort of the fallacy that has become evidence-based practice in that article that John Ioannidis from Stanford wrote in 2016, talking about how it had been hijacked, and evidence-based medicine's been hijacked by big pharma, big med, big tech to try to push certain agendas. So the people funding the research want us to stay in that lane, because it's really hard to conduct the studies that you're trying to conduct. And again, we'll come to more of that now, with the element of randomness that exists. So how do we begin to wrap our minds around consolidating this data and starting to, do we isolate out variables? Do we use AI? I mean, what are the ways that we're going to be able to start to put the pieces of this very complicated puzzle together?
Well, I think the first step we need to take is to get the scientific community to start understanding about synergies and the compounding nature of different variables. So as an example, fluoride and aluminum might both independently be toxic and neurotoxins, but when you combine them, they have a synergistic effect to be more toxic to the brain. Another example would be, like, let's say you're exposed to methylmercury. People talk about, mercury in fish and in the, air pollution and all these kinds of things. That alone is dangerous and is also a neurotoxin. But if you have somebody who's exposed to that, who's also just had a round of antibiotics, that is compounding the effect, where they're not going to be able to excrete the mercury from their body, because the microbiome plays an incredibly important role in helping demethylate mercury, to help you excrete it in your stool. So if you took a round of antibiotics, you're wiping out your microbiome, you're taking away your defense so that you will retain the mercury in your fatty tissues. So think about the compounding synergistic effect of multiple variables that maybe weren't there before. Like, people will say, like, well, why is everyone so reactive to mold right now? Mold's always been around. Or why is everyone so reactive? Like, why is everyone so, concerned about mercury? They were taking medicines with mercury in the 1900s. Like, you have to think about the compounding effect. So we need to begin to design studies that take that into account. And with machine learning and AI right now, this is way more doable than it used to be. So, as an example, we have a study, it's called the CHIRP study, that stands for Child Health Inventory for Resilience and Prevention. It's the largest environmental health questionnaire that I know of that takes into account as many variables as we can possibly imagine that a child might be exposed to in the modern world, positively or negatively. And
yeah, talk a little bit more about the chirp, if you would, please, because it's fascinating, the work you're doing with that.
Yeah, so the point of doing this study was to just take an inventory. Again, that's what it stands for, Child Health Inventory. We want to have an inventory of how the average American kid is living, and everyone's going to be different. But we want to test this hypothesis that the more health stressors a child has, the worse their health outcomes are. So it isn't so much about a single variable like the mercury or single variable like the aluminum. It's how do these things work in concert. Now, when we launched this study, it was 2018. This was really before AI. So we actually were trying to develop analytics methods and models so that we can make sense of, thousands of data points. And we were really struggling with it because the standard and conventionally used statistical models don't really work here. So we've developed some unique and interesting analytic models. But we are now looking to apply some of that machine learning and AI to the data, because what I think you can do now that you couldn't do before is, sort of almost like cluster data points, like all of the things that are affecting the microbiome could be like clustered into an index, and all the things that have sort of a toxicity profile could be clustered into an index. And you can do this readily with AI now. So that's where our studies are going. We're trying to get funding to put some AI to our data. And I think that that's going to be how we understand such complexity. The human body is incredibly complex, and we have to take that into consideration. In our preliminary data and the preliminary analysis that we've done, just collecting it for a couple of years, we have been able to validate the total load hypothesis and have been able to demonstrate that the more health stressors a child has, the worse their health outcomes are, the more complex their health outcomes are. So we've sort of piloted this to just test the theory. Now we really need to get a powered enough study with enough people participating to be able to really publish on it. And that's where we're going next, because we think that that will help shift the way people think. We need to stop thinking linearly. We need to stop thinking one molecule, one health outcome. We have to think total load. And you know what else is, when you accept this total load model, it's actually very empowering for the average parent, because you're the average parent and you might watch something on TikTok or Instagram that's like, did you know that your frying pan is toxic? Or did you know that your water had 75 different chemicals that can cause infertility? You get all this information bombarded, and the average parent's like, oh my God, how do I even live in this world, right? But the total load theory and the total load model, it tells that parent, do what you can to reduce as many known stressors or health stressors for your child. And that is going to help them be healthier. So you don't need to know every little thing. It's kind of like the 80-20 rule. I don't know if you've heard people use that. You don't have to get it perfect all the time, but do the best you can and lean into natural. If you lean into natural in your food, in your home environment, in your work environment, you do everything you can to sort of live more naturally in rhythm with nature, you're going to do okay. So that's why I like this model too, because it's very empowering for parents. You don't need to read all the ingredients and know all what they are. But you do need to read the ingredients and be like, which one looks more natural? Which one is going to be a little bit closer to nature? And that is a powerful day-to-day tool that helps them take action and know how to move through the day.
That's so awesome you're doing that and starting to tabulate that data, and that total load hypothesis, that total load concept is huge, because that's why it's so hard, because someone will say, oh, well, we ate off of fry pans, like you said, for decades, and we never was a problem. Why is this a problem now? And I think that's what also gets so hard for us as parents, but also just as humans, to wrap our minds around, is there are so many things. And one of the things we're going to talk about is the impact of stress on this, and it just adds to the stress. So here we are, time and lack of time is cutting into our sleep, which we'll also talk about, the impact of deep and restful sleep. And so then we're up late looking into these things and trying to figure out. And as parents, there's guilt, and you don't want to expose your children to things that could harm them, but you don't know where to begin. So that is so awesome that you are starting to at least develop a framework with which we can start to break down some of these variables and see the hot spots. What are the things that really tend to light people up, and what combinations of these factors are starting to have the most profound impact? Because most people know, and that's why I love the way you explained it, that everything essentially biologically is a threshold, right? Whether it's the toxicity of water, whether it's We all have good and bad bacteria within our bodies. Most people know that. Simple example, any parent, we'll talk about the antibiotic side in a moment too, and the gut microbiome, but who's had their child go on to an antibiotic, the child oftentimes, if not always, will develop thrush. Well, that's an imbalance, right? There's a threshold of certain microorganisms, and the yeast were able to proliferate excessively in that case because the homeostatic nature of the intraoral microbiome was altered. So we get that, right? So it's not like anytime you have any micro alteration in that biome for most people, there's this, all of a sudden you have a mouthful of thrush and candidiasis. So that concept is there. It's just we don't tend to apply it to these things because we hear vaccines cause autism or we hear these isolated things, and then people start to get panicked about every little thing. So to get a little more controversial on these topics, and I'm happy to dive as deeply into them as I said to you, we were leading into the show. In full disclosure, I don't have to answer to anybody but myself. I have this content and I create this content for my audience and for no one else. So I get to talk about what I want to talk about and what I think the audience wants to hear. So the topics of both vaccines and whether that's related to the rise in autism, and fluoride and what's going on with fluoride, which was introduced into the municipal water supplies and has now been in some areas taken out. So we can start with the vaccine side and the rising rates of autism. Is that one of those things where there seems to be a more direct cause and effect from the data and the literature that you've studied? Or does it seem to be this is just another one of those contributing factors in the total load hypothesis?
Well, one of the reasons we did the CHIRP study was to not only test the hypothesis of total load, but is also to look for strong signal in the noise. So is there a set of variables or individual variables that feature more prominently in kids who have chronic health or developmental conditions like autism? And the answer to that is yes, there are. And in our preliminary data, which again is too small to be able to publish on or to say anything concretely, so this is really preliminary, so you have to take it for what it is, but there's signal in the noise. And one of the biggest categories is antibiotics. No surprise there. Meaning kids, and think about this, we've had so many rounds of antibiotics. If you look at this in a multi-generational way, it's just compounding, and like the microbiome gets passed from mom to baby. It's shared within the families, and so that's a major factor, and that's so tightly linked to sort of ability to detoxify, our ability to digest nutrients, and our ability to regulate the immune system. And we've just carpet bombed as a society our microbiomes. So another category that has come up with stronger noise is vaccines. And so we have this narrative going on in this country, which is vaccines cause autism or they don't. Well, if you have a child who's had the full CDC schedule who doesn't have autism, of course you're going to say, well, vaccines don't cause autism because my child doesn't have autism. But then there's the parent who said, my child has had the full CDC schedule and my child was fine until their 12-month vaccines or their 18-month vaccines, and they had a regression, and then they all of a sudden stopped speaking. So how do you reconcile those two things? You reconcile those two things by doing good science and doing it in a way that's unbiased and not paid for by the interests that want to see vaccines as the victor and flawless and without reproach. Nothing should be beyond reproach in our modern living. We have this debate where it's not even allowed for discussion. It is like you are either on the side of vaccines or you're not. And then if you're not on the side of vaccines, you're a quack, you're a pseudoscience, you're, spreading dangerous misinformation. That is not what we should be doing right now. Dr. Joel Warsh, who is a pediatrician in Los Angeles, just published a great book basically saying, can we have this debate, please, in a way that is calm and rational and looks at the data rather than just shutting it down? And that's what's happening in our sort of media outlets and all the avenues that we are trying to talk about this. We're trying to discuss the data in a meaningful way. And there's some people who have been challenging the vaccine research and trying to get people who are supportive of the vaccine safety research to dialogue with them, and they won't dialogue. So that's problem number one, is we need to move past that, and we actually have to have a dialogue because there is enough of data out there, and there's plenty of medical literature showing, for instance, that the cumulative effect of all the aluminum adjuvants put into the vaccines far exceeds the safety limit for a small baby per weight requirements. And so that is not even a conversation we're having. So The answer with...
And those are probably studies that have not been conducted, right? I mean, by the vaccine companies. They're not going to conduct a study to look at the cumulative impact of the additives.
So we had three. When I was a baby, I had three. I had polio, I had DTP, and I had, oh gosh, I can't even remember. MMR. But it wasn't combined yet, I don't think, because I'm old enough that we're...
Maybe not, right. Yeah.
But now we have like 79 doses delivered before the child is out of toddlerhood, as opposed to 3. Don't you think it's a fair question that we ask, like, well, does that make a difference? And I think we need to basically, and I think with the recent change in administration, Robert Kennedy is trying to engage in that dialogue and obviously experiencing a lot of resistance. But what I will say is that
this will be, by the way, 3 consecutive episodes where the MAHA movement, to speak of, or this new sort of question the medical establishment, big pharma, has come up in totally different contexts. It wasn't even like I'm done exactly 3 episodes, but it's the good news is that 3 consecutive guests have brought up the concept of changing the way we start to think and having the dialogue. And I'm a big believer, and I face a lot of blowback in my community for the things I discuss and pushing that envelope towards a more proactive approach to orthodontic treatment and care, is I always say to people, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to even like what I say or the way I do it. Once people start to shut down speech, I have been wiped off of certain platforms online, certain orthodontic only social media groups. I put a post up on something, they cut it instantly. I reply to people's posts, they take it down. Once people are doing that and not open to discussion, instantly my radar goes up. Because if you were so confident you were right, wouldn't you want the discussion? Right. Because you could then prove very quickly and easily that what you're saying is correct. So always be wary of the people trying to shut down speech in any capacity is something I kind of live by, and not to get too philosophical on it, but it's not, it doesn't even have to be it's become political, but it's not political. This is about health and questioning data and science and research and always trying to push to be better. So I just wanted to add that. Yeah. Little bit of experience there and that anecdote, because the good news is, again, we're talking about this, and the more people we can talk about this and question, the better.
Right. And, there's this phrase I hear again and again, that the science is settled. That's not how science works.
No, science should never be settled.
Inquiry, you can challenge science, that's okay. So it's become dogmatic. But for obvious reasons, there is a very complex, large, and institutionalized system to try and prevent infectious diseases in our children. That is a good thing, to have this system that's trying to have, most people I would say on the side of keeping the vaccine schedule the way it is and not questioning it, are doing that out of a place where they have good intentions. They want to prevent infectious diseases in children. But it's also based on a 19th century idea of infectious disease and how infectious diseases happen. I mean, it's the germ-based versus the terrain-based, right? It's the Beauchamp terrain theory that's been suppressed for 150 years in favor of Pasteur's theory that the germ is what causes disease. And the modern systems-based understanding of how disease happens understands that the terrain of the body, or sort of how healthy the cells are. Do you have nutritional reserves? How much inflammation is the body dealing with? What's the stress level like? How much cortisol is the body pumping? All of those things are going to be factors that determine whether somebody succumbs to an infectious agent or fights it effectively. So if you think about the microbiome, and how I was saying before, we've carpet bombed the microbiome over the last 75 years, that is destroying your immune system. That is preventing your immune system from doing its job that it was naturally designed to do. So should we be taking that into consideration when we're looking at our infectious disease management? Absolutely. How about nutrition? The number one thing you can do to protect yourself from infectious diseases is make sure you are nourished, that you are getting sunlight, that you are getting movement and sleep and all these kinds of things. Do we have that conversation in the pediatrician's office, or do we tell them to get their vaccine? I think it's actually, our public policy on this is very degrading to the average parent. And it's I don't trust you to be able to do healthy things for your child. So I'm going to give you this vaccine, which will do it for you. That's really insulting to the average parent. The average parent would be if you have other things that will help me keep my child healthy, please tell me, what should I be feeding my child? Should I take my child in the sun? Everybody thinks that sun exposure causes skin cancer. No, it doesn't. You need sun exposure. You just need to do it appropriately. It actually causes you to have more resilience and ability to fight infectious diseases. Why don't we talk about sun exposure in the pediatrician's office? Because it's just easy in 5 minutes to just give them the vaccine in and out and bill them to the insurance company. That's that's the system. That's the institution that we've built in place. Well-intentioned, but not taking modern evidence and data into consideration, not understanding how the human body really works. Like, we are really stuck in the 19th century. Like, I was a history major as an undergrad, and I love history, and I love taking the long view of things. And I go back to the 19th century, I'm like, we are pretty much doing the same kind of approach to health as we did in the 19th century. Like, things have not changed a lot in terms of what part of our conventional system. The people that are doing sort of the advanced stuff are on the peripheries and the margin. That's the people who are doing integrative systems based, the airway orthodontists. Those people are like advanced, and we just need the rest of the system to catch up.
Yeah, and because they're outliers with anything, change and presenting new ideas and different ways of doing things are always chastised and ridiculed initially. It's just human nature. We like what's comfortable. And I agree with you. I don't feel the physicians, and I say all the time, my dental colleagues who aren't interested in earlier treatment or airway focused treatment or normalizing anatomy with the help of doing more than just treating the symptoms of the teeth that we see. I really don't fault them, vilify them, look at them as nefarious. I agree with you. They are trying. I mean, I say often, I don't feel people go into the healthcare professions with an intent to harm. Like, I just don't really think those two, it's hard to reconcile those two conflicting points of view, or instincts, right? If your instinct is to be someone that's more healthcare oriented and wanting to help patients, you probably, or more likely, are not going to spend all that time, money, and energy to go into a profession where you are looking to try to help people.
Right.
And I feel there's an altruistic nature to the majority of healthcare providers. Do some get off track and some for money? Of course, there's always outliers and things. I think, again, the vast, vast majority. The tough part is, and you alluded to this before very nicely, is the system is so broken that once they're in that system, and whether I take it to my own profession with orthodontics, and it's directly analogous to the pediatricians in an interesting way. We've kind of done it to ourselves in ortho, whereas in the medical model, it's been big med and big healthcare that have kind of imposed, and big insurance imposed these regulations on the docs. The problem remains the same, and that is we don't spend enough time in the diagnostic process. A lecture I just gave for the Florida Dental Association, one of the things I spent time talking about was, and a lot of times when I lecture, I talk about the need to spend more time in the diagnostic process. Most orthodontists spend, and this is by surveys when I survey my audience or when I speak or just asking colleagues, always the answer I get for the amount of time an orthodontist spends in a new patient exam is less than 5 minutes. Most of the times the answer is like 1 to 2 is what I get. So, right, how are you going to detect all these other issues? Well, why? Because the consultants in our industry and people in our industry have said you make more money with your hands in the clinic treating patients, right? That is our quote unquote drug, right? It's a solution. We can deliver a billable service and go through it pretty quickly. You can churn that. Now, your outcomes and your end results, again, that's a different discussion. Medicine, same thing. The system has dictated that these docs get to spend 5, maybe 10 minutes in the room with the patient. I'm blown away by the number of docs I coach, how many of them. There was just one the other day I was coaching. He's a pediatric dentist in California, and he was showing me a couple of cases that I'm working on with him. And Beth, these patients, their adenoids are literally 75% obstructive or greater. One of them had such nasal inflammation and turbinate hypertrophy. And these kids are 7, 8 years of age, and I'm looking, and I literally said to him, I said, how sad is it that it took coming to you and you learning about something that you didn't learn in school? He graduated in 2019, so he's doing a ton of additional education to try to learn about this. It took that to figure out that we could help this child suffering. And so, yeah, the system is very broken, and we're going to have to do a lot in restructure that. On that note, in the dental profession, fluoride. It's been a huge topic lately. Everything you see from the CDC, the WHO and the ADA is saying that this is safe, it's effective, it's been one of the single greatest health advances in the 20th century when it came out. That our underserved communities are really going to suffer if this is removed from water supplies. There are others who say that it's a toxin, that it's a neurotoxin, that it has all sorts of detrimental effects, neurocognitive effects. There's a recent study that was published that talked about the negative effects of fluoride, and then the people who are in favor of it are refuting that, saying it was poorly conducted and it was across like 7 or 8 countries, I think. So there's these two sides, right? And the parent, again, is just sitting there going, I don't want my kids' teeth to rot out of their head, but I also don't want to be causing harm. It's like the vaccine, right? Like, I don't want my child getting sick or a severe illness. I also don't want to be increasing my child's risk of having some chronic health condition. Mm-hmm. So what have you found on the fluoride side of things?
Obviously very complicated. I mean, if you think about public health policy, it typically caters to the least common denominator, right? So I grew up in a dental house. I actually served probably illegally as a dental assistant for my dad on lots of occasions where I would hold Mr. Thirsty. And he was the only dentist in New Hampshire who took Medicaid patients, or one of 2 maybe. And so I saw these kids come in with such bad dental caries, their teeth were falling out. Like, I understand that the public health interest to prevent those kids and the kids who maybe don't have access to the nutrition or don't have access to, other ways to support their dental health. Like, I get it. I understand why it happens. And has it helped these kids, prevent some caries? Yeah, I think it has. By the same token, it should be a choice. And it should be something that people have full information on. And I think there is enough literature out there to argue that that fluoride is a neurotoxin and should be, if it is administered, it should be administered with full consent that it is a neurotoxin, that there are better ways to prevent dental caries than fluoride. And certainly in the public water system, you can't have it in public water systems and have a choice. So I think that the other factor that plays in here that is concerned about the public water systems is that it's cumulative effect. Like, I remember when I had my kids, when they were little, again, I'm coming from the dental house. So I took fluoride tablets when I was a kid. I had fluoride treatments every 6 months. Like, I had plenty of fluoride. Like, I might have intellectual disability as a result of it, but I did this. And when my kids were little,
we were guinea pigs. I remember for topical fluoride. My dad was a dentist, and my uncles as well. And in their office, we were like the test subjects in the 80s remember the trays? They were like the styrofoam trays that had that tangy. I'm salivating even thinking about it. It had
causing a gag reflex in me right now. It was so awful.
Literally, they're like, "Oh, you want orange?" I mean, they were kind of flavor this stuff, and you put it in there, and you literally would like tingle every nerve in your body. But so we're swallowing this stuff. I agree with you. So maybe that explains some of my issues today.
Yeah, it does explain some of my issues. But again, this is multi-generational. So we have the first couple of generations of people who live through that and are impacted by that. So I remember being a young parent and walking down the aisles of a grocery store and seeing fluoridated Poland Springs. And I was like, oh, I should get that. Meanwhile, plastic water bottles, I had no idea at the time the plastic water bottles, the hazard that they are. But I saw that and I was like, oh, I grew up with a dad who was a dentist and he would say fluoride is good. So I should give that to my kids. I remember buying it and then, thinking through it. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is in the public water. They're getting their dental treatments. And do I need to be giving them in a bottled water? But it's like I think we think very, in a very simplistic way about it. Fluoride, good. Fluoride, bad. Like, it's not that simple. So net, I would say I have not used fluoride in over 20 years. I don't have a single cavity in my mouth. I do all the other things to support my microbiome, including my oral microbiome, which people don't even talk about, right? And have I been able to escape cavities with my kids? No. That's harder because the kids' diet is horrific. So even if you control it at home, they're out in the world. I think diet is probably among the most important things you can do to prevent caries. Sunlight is another, important feature. So I understand.
And not mouth breathing as well, and drying out.
Huge. That is huge.
Yep.
And I understand why public health wants fluoride. I get it. You've got kids who are going to have no teeth. unless they get some kind of support, but we're giving them the wrong kind of support. And so I don't know what the answer is, because, we would need to do a major initiative to try and improve the dental health of all of America's kids. I think screening, like you were talking about earlier, like prevention and getting those kids in to see the dentist, a functional dentist or airway orthodontist early, you're going to prevent so much dental decay if you get those kids in early, like 3 years old, 4 years old. Yep. I mean, you would know the appropriate age to get them in there. But if you can even do that as a preventative screening measure, that would have huge impacts, right? And then obviously teaching about nutrition and how important that is. It doesn't exist in this country. So I feel very conflicted about fluoride, because I understand dentists who make really good cases for oral topical treatment. I get it, but I don't do it myself. I don't do it for my kids. My kids have had very few cavities, but it is hard. It's definitely hard.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we also have so many good points there. I want to touch on a couple. We also have sealants. I was also a guinea pig for those with your kids. But I know it's a plastic. And as you said, it's this threshold, this maximal load, bisphenol A. And I get it. I get that there's some exposure. But sealing the teeth certainly does, especially with people with deep grooves. So do we need sealants and fluoride? I don't know that there's been studies to run to look at that, right? Mm-hmm. Like patients who have sealants and don't have fluoride and vice versa, and then have both and have none, right? I don't know that I've never seen it. And so that's one issue, is we have other ways that we can think about this. So just chalking it up, which has always seemed a bit weird to me and I was president of the local dental society in the county in which I practiced. And I wrote a letter supporting fluoridation, because at that point, this is like 17 years ago, they were looking at potentially taking it out of the municipal water supply. So I'm with you. Like, I grew up thinking this is just what it is. Fluoride's good. It's been a huge public service. But then I've been more skeptical of a lot of things lately. Part of it's been my journey I've been on with this whole airway arena and starting to figure out my orthodontic profession and the way that we treat the symptom and not the cause. And I've just been trying to think a little more deeply about things and question my own realities. And I said, geez, okay, yeah, but there's sealants. Sealants are hugely effective to minimize at least pit and fissure, not interproximal decay, but pit and fissure caries. So that's one part of it. The other part is we just kind of chalk up these underserved populations to, well, they're never going to know any better. We can't do any better. So, we might as well just, give them something like fluoride. How about we put the time and energy we put into putting this into the municipal water supply and regulating these levels to educating them and doing community outreach programs and getting better funding to allow dentists to provide services to the underserved populations that are preventative, instead of covering them, extracting teeth and doing pulpotomies. And why don't we cover, just like with ortho, the preventative work, right? So again, it has to be a more of a mindset shift. It's like we just chalk this up to like, oh, well, it is what it is. And this is the only way we can protect them. So yes, you can make it a choice as well. And then people can be educated about it, which if it really does work in time, you would think people would say, well, I want to do this for my child or myself because I choose this route. The other thing you hit on that's interesting, and I don't hear people talk about, is you talked about it with the fluoridated water in the bottle, plastic bottle. We don't talk about cumulative, we don't talk about dosage, period. We talk about the recommended level of 0.7 milligrams per liter recommended by the CDC, but we don't talk about dosage. So maybe I'm being overly simplistic about this, but if you have one beer or a 12-pack, you have different exposure to alcohol. It's still the same, 4% alcohol by volume, right? Mm-hmm. But your body's response to that changes the more you take in. Okay, how much water, when they did these studies, were people actually drinking? I think there's more of a push for hydration today. So people, I think, are certainly hydrating to a greater extent today. Then you add in, maybe you drink some soda as well. Where was that bottled? Where was the bottled water bottled? You start to add in these cumulative exposures to it, because back then, maybe they just were getting it in the municipal water supply. They weren't also getting it in all these other places. The food you eat, how are the produce that you eat, where is it grown, right? Do we know how much fluoride is incorporated into produce that is grown in areas that the supply that the water is coming through the irrigation is fluoridated? again, why can't we ask these questions? Why is it literally like this is one of the greatest public health advances ever and you can't ask this stuff? Like, no, we can ask this stuff. And at the end of the day, tooth decay was not a major problem 1,000 years ago. Right. In some civilizations where they started having, getting sugar cane and you started to see it. But when we were, let's go back 10,000 years ago, when we were hunters and gatherers and just starting to develop sub-Saharan Africa, kind of more of an industrialization of our farm agriculture. We're starting to kind of develop agriculture. We realized that we didn't just go pick something and eat it. We could start to grow things with intent. You look at skulls and prehistoric skulls, you don't see decay. You see tooth loss and periodontals. You see wear of teeth because of their coarse diets. You see some bone loss and some, but you don't see a lot of like tooth decay. I have a skull I studied from all throughout my education. It was from my grandpa, and who was an oral surgeon, and there's no tooth decay. I mean, on this, it's 30 complement of 32 teeth, beautifully straight, and so again, I think we need to think about this. Of well, are there other things we could do except just treat it? It almost to me, and I want to hear your thoughts as well, ties into the polypharma concept, right? So we have this problem, right, that is increased tooth decay, and let's just throw something else at it that we don't necessarily know the effects of and tell everybody you need to take this because this is what you have to do for health.
Right. I mean, that's what the Weston Price Foundation always talks about, is they look at ancestral diets and how the chronic diseases of the modern era didn't exist 350,000 and certainly not thousands of years ago. And the indigenous societies that are not touched by the Western world have beautiful jaw structure and beautiful teeth and no decay and all that kind of stuff. So it goes back to diet is a major piece of it, but just diet and lifestyle too. I mean, you have to take whole body health into consideration, and like things like getting natural sunlight are part and parcel of whole body health. Being outside in nature is part and parcel of whole body health. I mean, you think about like cortisol. Cortisol is something that, like, with inadequate sunshine and nature and stress management, you're going to have pumping cortisol. What does cortisol do? It increases your blood sugar. Like you're going to change, you're going to become insulin resistant from stress, and poor diet, obviously.
And then downregulates your body it downregulates the ability of your body to handle more stress.
Correct. So it's like we need to be thinking about like the big picture here, and so we want to advocate for more traditional based diets, but we want to advocate for more traditional based lifestyles too. I mean, we all sit indoors for 16 hours a day. We never go outside. That's going to have an impact on our health. And so the mouth is connected to the rest of the body. So it all matters. I actually feel like I get, you asked earlier in the beginning about how people were like, how the medical community was receptive or not to what I was learning and talking about. I found a lot of the more open people were actually dentists, like my own father and my brother-in-law and some other people I knew, because they know the mouth is connected to the gut. You know what I mean? Like there was that natural, like I'm thinking about oral health because diet was always a big part of what my dad talked to his patients about. My pediatrician, when I was growing up, didn't talk to us about diet, but my dad talked to his patients about diet. Why? Because sugar will cause you to have cavities. I mean, that was sort of the basis, right? But it was also just like, you need to make sure you're getting a good diet to help your teeth stay strong. Like dentists get it, right? I just feel like that's, like culturally, we need to really put more emphasis on educating people about the importance of diet and making it as traditional, ancestrally rooted as possible.
I completely agree. And on the element of nature, sunlight, getting out into those areas, for a while when I was kind of starting my platform, I was doing these things called Motivational Mondays before I was doing weekly podcast episodes. And I was just putting some content out, and I just want to just cite two of the examples I put in that. One was a 2019 study published in Current Directions in Psychological Science, found that being exposed to natural environment improves working memory, cognitive flexibility, and attentional control, while exposure to urban environments can be linked to attention deficits. And then another study in 2019, Dr. Gregory Bratman at University of Washington shared evidence that contact with nature is associated with increases in happiness, subjective well-being, positive affect, positive social interactions, a sense of meaning and purpose in life, and even decreases mental distress.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's not this like, it's kind of like now we're realizing it's like fresh air, right? The way you breathe, all these things we'd hear as kids, like take a breath, when you're stressed, but it's rooted in, or go for a walk outside, calm down. Well, where do these things come from? Because we know our bodies respond in certain ways to certain stimuli. So again, I love that you're mentioning all of that. And one other thing you just mentioned, I want to make sure we give a little time to, before we talk a little bit about the sleep side, is gut microbiome. We've touched on it throughout the talk today. Hippocrates, what was it, 340 BC, right? All disease begins in the gut. I mean, we have known, which, by the way, it's so interesting how many, when you're being a student of history, you know this, how many, when you look back historically, before we had all this technology to rely upon, when we had to rely upon our instincts and our brains for everything, I mean, many things were wrong, but how many things they actually understood at an innate level that it just, again, blows my mind. But so this is over 2,000 years ago. We're talking about the fact that disease begins in the gut. What is the impact that you think, from your research and what you're looking at in your experience, how much of this is tied to the gut?
When I started this work well over 15 years ago, I started researching for my book, A Compromised Generation, I thought it was all about the gut. I was convinced it was like 99%. In fact, the first title for my book was Gut. I was like, I'm going to call it Gut, because I felt, because I just got into the literature. And even this was in 2008 when I was writing this book and researching it. And there was already so much research in 2008 linking the microbiome to immune function, nutrient synthesis, neurotransmitter production. I mean, it was everything. It was the holy grail for me. In fact, about 2/3 of my book is about microorganisms in the gut and the microbiome. Subsequently, I have learned so much more about other factors that are equally important. And the gut doesn't exist in isolation. Like, I remember thinking very mechanistically about it, like it was a pond and we just needed to treat the pond so that the good microorganisms would grow and the bad ones would recede. Like, I really had that sort of mechanistic thinking about it. But the human body, I've learned in the last 15 years, is so complex that, like, the nervous system and your emotions and everything that you're thinking about is affecting the microbiome, and vice versa. Like, the microbiome is influencing what you're thinking about and what you're craving and, what your emotions are, and your ability to regulate or not regulate your emotions is all wrapped up. And the immune system, like every piece of what we interface with, every factor we interface with in the world, is going to interface with that microbiome on some level. And the complexity, I don't even think we'll, in 100 years, fully understand the complexity of what's going on in the human body. So I think the microbiome is, of course, foundational. It's why we're seeing so many sick kids, because we have done so much to disrupt the microbiome in the last 75 to 90 years in particular, because of all the antibiotics and the proton pump inhibitors and the glyphosate and all the things that, cause microbiome gut dysbiosis. But like I said, it doesn't exist in isolation. It's the modern living. Staying up late and looking at blue light on your screen is affecting your microbiome. And having parents who argue with each other is affecting your microbiome. So it's not a variable we can isolate, but it is. What I do like about focusing on the microbiome is we do have a lot of power in terms of what we can do about it, in terms of interventions, because you can, every single time you open your mouth and you put something in there, you can influence your microbiome positively or negatively. So that gives people a lot of power. Does it fix everything? No. I know people that have been on spectacular microbiome diets for years and they can't regulate their nervous system because of emotional trauma or what have you, that they just can't get things. It's kind of like I was saying before with cortisol and the blood sugar, that's going to influence your microbiome. So there are a lot of ways to get at it, but I do feel like it is a very powerful tool through diet that we can modify the microbiome. And like we were talking about before, if you have early intervention and you can get that airway health into consideration, you're going to affect the microbiome. You're going to have such a better health outcome with the microbiome by just affecting the structural issues, the airway issues, the oxygenation the body's getting is going to change the microbiome. So I love it when we focus on it, but it's not the whole picture.
Yeah, one of those many factors in the total load, but I think a pretty heavy one, a pretty hot spot, like you said. Yeah. Want to talk a little bit about sleep. We've touched on it a little bit, and you mentioned just with blue light, with disruptions in sleep and in more of my arena where I deal a lot with and have gone on this journey learning more about sleep medicine and pediatric sleep disordered breathing, and how it's changing not only the way the shape of the face grows, but the neurocognitive impacts, the behavioral impacts. There's some studies that show that upwards of 50% of the children diagnosed with ADHD also have pediatric sleep disordered breathing. Now, again, people hear that and they say, you're saying sleep disordered breathing causes ADHD. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it can cause ADHD-like symptoms. It's certainly, ADHD can certainly exist in the absence of a sleep-related breathing disorder. But when, as we know, ADHD diagnosis, just like sleep disordered breathing in a child, is subjective. It's based. It's looked at from two, you probably know better than me, but two professionals in that child's life, and they have to fill out a form survey. I mean, it's pediatric sleep disordered breathing is essentially the same. It's a symptom-based diagnosis. You use patient history and clinical presentation. So those are hard. I always say when I speak and lecture on this, like, we like tests and things that can quantify very easily. Like, that's why I think we've latched onto the whole OSA, even though OSA in children is minimally relevant, especially in children who may not have moderate or severe apnea issues with their obstruction of their airway. So when we talk about the impacts that these even short episodes of apnea or hypopnea are having, these short desaturations, the medical literature is full of evidence that the even short desaturations that would never qualify on PSG as an apnea at full 10 or greater second apnea or hypopnea have significant impacts on the developing brain, on the child's overall health and well-being. It keeps them in a state of sympathetic overdrive. They end up not being able to get this deep, restful parasympathetic sleep, and that can have tremendous impacts on that child during the day. So where does that tie into all of this? What are you seeing in your data, in talking to parents? How many of these kids are you sensing that is something, or how big of a factor is that in the load, I guess we should say?
I wish we could quantify it, because I don't know the answer to how big of a factor that is, but I know for sure it is a major contributor. I remember reading once, I have a friend who's a functional orthodontist, her name's Elizabeth Walker, and she once gave me an article, and I'm going to butcher the title of it, but something to the effect of, is it ADHD or is it sleep deprivation? And she was the first one that brought this to me, and she was explaining to me how she was using those nasal the silicone nasal plugs that help encourage nasal oxygenation, and how she was seeing in her patients major improvements in ADHD symptoms just with the plugs, not even doing any kind of oral appliance or anything like that. And when she told me that, I was like, oh, I got to look into this. This is major. I know this is major. And subsequently, I've learned just how common this is. So now when I used to say, like when I published my book, people would come to me with a child with ADHD, and I'd be like, you got to look in their microbiome, because like that dopamine, the serotonin, that's all off kilter if they've got gut dysbiosis, and we looked into the blood sugar and that was my answer. Now one of my first answers is, have you had their airway evaluated? Are they sleeping at night? Are they mouth breathers? So these, like, for every kid, it's going to be different. Like as an example, I have a neighbor and good friend who has 3 children. All 3 were diagnosed with ADHD. All 3 were on ADHD medications. She was really struggling with them. They were having behavioral issues at school, and it was just a very, very difficult time managing these kids. Her youngest son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. When this happened, the entire family decided that they were going to go ketogenic to manage the diabetes, so he didn't have dangerous blood sugar spikes up and down. Wouldn't you know, when the whole family went ketogenic, all 3 kids lost all those ADHD symptoms. All 3 of them came off their medications. That family, the issue was definitely a blood sugar issue. Like they were eating a diet that was creating ADHD symptoms in their children. But there are other families that I know where they have chronic inflamed tonsils, can't breathe, mouth, they're getting the orthodontics, but it's not like nothing's helping. Those kids have airway issues that are contributing, as you said. So, and some kids have both of those, the blood sugar plus the airway and the microbiome.
Right.
So it's not like you can tease apart and be like, it's the airway, it's the microbiome, it's the blood sugar. It's what is it for your child? Because your child is unique and individual. That's why a history, you talked about this before, sort of like spending time on the diagnostic piece. A health history is invaluable because you know what has happened to this kid. You know what their habits are. Are they getting air at night? Are they getting a high sugar diet? What other symptoms do they have? Do they have allergies? Like there's so many variables, but we have to take a bio-individual approach if we're going to help these kids and we're going to give them interventions that help. I am such a fan of screening across not just for airway, but screening for other things that could be contributing to the let's look for the root causes. What could be contributing to this? Is it your diet? Is it your lifestyle? Is it the fact that the child sits on a device 24/7 and never goes anywhere outside the couch? These are actionable items that we can do and that we can help these kids, but we have to do the health history. We have to know what's going on in that child's life.
Yeah, and sadly, I so agree. Sadly, screening is not really reimbursed. And it gets back to your earlier point, right, of the system being broken. You don't get paid the same to screen as you do to treat. It's a minimal fee, and it takes a lot of time. And so it's a disincentive to get at the cause and start to figure all this out and put all these pieces together. It also requires additional knowledge in areas outside of just your own scope. You do have to have other areas of expertise, so to speak. So it requires, and we're not, back to again, we were talking about the schools aren't teaching this. It's not being taught. The other part about the health history and screening, when you do this and you start to put this together, it does become much more clear. And I think the converse is true as well. When you look at just all the symptoms and then start to throw treatments, medications at them, you end up having this compounding effect. And now you don't even know what is causing what anymore, right? You take some of those kids you were just talking about, and let's say instead of changing the diets, they just started introducing more meds or changing the dosage of their meds, right? Putting them on, it's like, as I say, speed, right? Ritalin, and Adderall, and trying to get them to regulate that way. Well, now there's side effects to that. And so you start going down this path where it gets harder and harder to parse out what is even at the cause of this, and that's why I get early intervention, early discussion. We were talking before, you mentioned about time to start for going to the dentist and starting to get proactive. I had a mother-daughter team was amazing. The Dean Duru's on, and their pediatric dentist in Virginia. They were talking about, they're doing neonatal analysis and working with moms on how to understand how the nutrition of the mother can impact the microbiome of these children, right? And getting in when these kids are just born and starting to help them with nursing and feeding. And so there's so much we don't know. And my orthodontic colleagues hear that and they're like, that's insane. There's no need for that. They're just doing it for the money. It's like, look, last time I checked, you're billing for your services too, right? Like that's just, right? I mean, it's like, unless you're doing everything for free, then, we could have a different discussion, but, we're all just trying to help people in the way we know best. And I think to think that there's one way to do it is naive. And on that, as we kind of wind things down, I want to get into just a couple minutes here on the treatment side, what we can do, and necessarily shouldn't say treatment, the modalities, the things that are out there. Awareness obviously is a huge one. The work you're doing with the CHIRP study and starting to be able to put a little more knowledge behind some of the biggest hotspots or the most dangerous combinations. What about regenerative medicine, future of stem cell technologies, peptides, photobiomodulation? What are you seeing in that arena? I know you have your finger on that pulse a lot more than most. How effective is it now, do you feel? And what do you think is the potential going forward?
I would say we pay a very close attention to what's coming. What's the latest new innovation that will be available to help the body heal and restore health, especially because we have a very large autism community, and those parents who are like, they're like doing the research, they're on the cutting edge, they're flying around the world, getting the latest this and the latest that, because their kids' bodies are the most dysregulated. Their cells are the most toxic. They have the greatest challenges. So they're really looking for what's new, what's great. All those things you mentioned, whether it's like platelet therapy or photobiomodulation or peptides or EBU or like whatever these different technologies are, I would say, some are amazing, some are great, and some like, I don't know if it's worth the money, but I see all of them as hacks. So you can take some shortcuts to get, help with symptoms. Like, do I have red light at home? Yep, I do. Why do I have it? Because I know not every day I can get out at sunrise and sunset. I try to go out every day to get my sort of full spectrum of light. I try to get outside as much as possible, but I'm running a business and I have to be indoors a lot. So I have red light therapy at home. It's a hack. You should always get back to the foundational pieces of health, the outside exposure, the diet, the movement, the compassionate, loving relationships, like all the things that make us as human beings healthy. Get to the foundations and do the best you can. But if you can't do all those things, sure, there's so many great hacks. And I feel like we have to be very careful about relying on the hacks. And I'll give you an example. Peptides. Peptides are so hot right now. Everyone's like taking their BPC, whatever, and Ozempic, and like they're just doing all these things because it's a hack. It's easy. It also ties into what I was saying before about this culture of there's a pill for every ill. Like a peptide's a pill. That's easy. It's a hack. Can it be helpful if the dosing is right? Like I'm really concerned with peptides and the dosing. That's why people have Ozempic face and all these problems, gastroparesis, because they're taking the wrong dose of the peptide. So can you have some help from that, a jump start from taking some of these modalities? Sure. But you can't do it at the expense of not doing the other things. Like I feel like Americans are like quick, cheap, easy. Let's go. What's the way I can do this? And like still go and run. Your body will tell you what your limits are. Your body's going to be like, sorry, no, that peptide was wonderful, but you still need to go outside. I really enjoyed that photobiomodulation, but if you don't get up and move your body, you're still going to have symptoms. If you don't eat a nutrient-dense diet, that EBU is not going to help you. So like, we do the best we can and we use these hacks, sure. And sometimes these hacks are great for getting us over the hump, right? Like if we are having a really difficult time regulating our nervous system, you could use something like, one of those vagus nerve stimulators. Like there's great tools out there. I'm like excited about the innovation. I'm not like a Luddite who hates technology, but we have to keep the foundations in place too and work towards those.
Oh, it's so well said. And I'm glad you said that because I do agree that we just want a modality, right? We want something quick and easy. And it's not a criticism. I'm guilty of it myself, right? You just want something that you can do. I think everybody can just think about how you feel when you eat well, when you're exposed to sunshine, when you're not overly stressed, when you're not up on devices or social media late at night, when you're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep, of good sleep. Think about how you feel. And as you said, your body will tell you a lot of this. I mean, I know when I transitioned from my private practice life to what I do now, I really made a concerted effort to get better on my sleep. I was not good on my sleep. And it makes a huge difference in every facet of your life. So getting back to a general lifestyle of health is so important. And, just that take home message, right? The modalities are there, they can help, but they're hacks. And I love that. They're hacks and they're ways to try to help you along because life's not ideal. And you can't always, especially if you're speaking, traveling, a parent, running a business, you can't always live this perfectly calm, tranquil life. It's unrealistic. And people hear that and I think they think, well, heck with it, all or nothing, right? Like diet, like whatever, if I can't, no, you can do little bits of this and start to make little improvements. So what would be your sort of take home message? And if you want to talk too more about documenting hope and what you're doing, what is your take home message to everybody as with everything we've discussed in this episode that they can start to do? Because I'm imagining there's some people who are feeling a little anxious, feeling a little stressed, overwhelmed by some of this information. Where do they begin? Where do they start to try to get to live a healthier life for themselves and their children?
Well, I think one of the things I like to think about is partnership between clinicians and parents. So I spend a lot of time talking to parents, and parents are so used to outsourcing the care for their children. They're like, I'm going to find the best doctor. I'm going to find the best person to like the expert that's going to fix my child. You hear that a lot. That's how we've been trained. But I think, and I think the average parent is overwhelmed. Like, I didn't get my PhD in nutrition. Like, I don't know what to do with my child's airway issues. Like, that's valid. That's why I love the idea of partnership. So if you, as a parent, can find a couple of professionals that you trust, that you can work with, and you are the one driving the bus. You cannot outsource your child's care. So you find a partner who has a professional training to help you, but you got to implement the changes. You got to make all those lifestyle changes. You're the one who is in control. And this is, not just for parents, this is for anybody. Any patient at any part of the life spectrum is going to have to take power and ownership over their own health. Like, we need to recognize that we are the ones in charge here, but it can be really helpful to find a skilled human who has had, training that can help with the issues that are beyond our complexity. I'm not going to go put a palate expander in myself. I'm going to need a partner for that, Right. So I feel like, I think that's where we need to go in healthcare is partnership, is really just making sure that the patient and the practitioner are working together, are respecting each other and communicating. And I think that's the future of medicine.
I absolutely love it. you're changing the world. And I can't thank you enough for your time. The work you do, you consolidate it very nicely as a mom and a wife and someone who's busy and trying to put this together and also keep your own health in check, right? Because it could, I know, personally speaking, you try to get on these paths of doing things to help others, but then you neglect your own health. So it really is amazing what you're doing. And I can't thank you enough for not only the work you do, but for being willing to share it and teach it as well.
Oh, thank you. And you keep spreading the good word too. And that's part of how we make this revolution happen. You got to just educate people, and you're doing such a great job of that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it and love doing it. So how can people reach you? What's the best way to reach you, get in touch if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
So you can find us at documentinghope.com. And on there, you can access all of our free resources, webinars. We have a practitioner directory for people who are looking for a root cause oriented practitioner of all kinds. It isn't just, like pediatricians or anything like that. And we have a health coach training program, and you can learn about our research. We have a couple of research studies that we're actually going to be enrolling a few families with autism later this year. So that's something that people can find out about. And we have a private membership community for parents who are looking for help to learn how to do this work. You can find all that information on our website.
Amazing. Beth Lambert, been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for all you do and for coming on the show.
Thanks, Meg.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Doc Podcast. Be sure to visit theorthocoach.com to get access to ADA CERP recognized CE courses or to schedule a private one-on-one coaching session with me. Also, if you know of someone who would make a great guest for this show, or if you'd like to be a guest yourself, please email me at drmike@theorthocoach.com. And be sure to join the Doc community on Facebook for more great content. Thanks so much for listening, and always remember, you have been blessed with the ability to do amazing things.